York City is like the Mecca. These are people that really had the key to the city. And during the early 90s was a kid named Karlton Hines, who was no exception to this rule.
He was the best.
We thought he would be a pro.
The calls kind of made me like, I take your girl and bust your ass when you call me. And I got my money in you.
Karlton Hines would come to games. Couple thousand in his pocket. Nigga had minks, jewelry.
Pretty swift, real MVP in 55th. I can hoop, yo. All-American, my age group, yo. Grades bad, settle for a JUCO.
Karlton Dunkin Hines, also known as C-Town, was born in April of 1971 in the Bronx, New York, to his mother, Teresa Hines. Karlton's father wasn't in his life, but he did have 3 older brothers, Kevin, Kenny, and Keith. They lived in the South Bronx, Melrose housing projects, which was a very dangerous place during the time that Karlton was growing up as a kid.
Many residents are reluctant, if not scared, to talk about drugs and drug dealers in this Mott Haven neighborhood.
I mean, if you would have come around here 5 years ago, I think you'd think about it twice coming up this avenue.
But despite the circumstances, Karlton's mom would do the best that she could to keep her boys out of trouble and to keep them on the right track and provide the best life that she possibly could. Karlton loved his mom and wanted to give her a better life. And over time, it became clear that he may possess a gift that could elevate his family out of the projects. He would spend his nights at PS1 Park, playing basketball, working on his game every day, every night. Hundreds of layups, hundreds of jump shots, and by the age of 12, he was showing so much promise that he was dominating kids 5 years older than him. And by the age of 14, his name was ringing out in ABCD camps, Nike camps, and he was being recruited straight out of junior high by multiple colleges. He was sharpening his skills at Gaucho's gym, known for its tough games and fierce competition, under Coach Dave McCullough, and this is where he learned the fundamentals and toughness. Entering high school, Karlton was recruited by multiple schools around the city. They knew if he was on their basketball team, they would have a powerhouse, and a lot of them did anything that they could to get Karlton to come to their school, including a coach by the name of Stan Denner, who convinced Karlton to leave his Bronx neighborhood and to attend high school in Harlem at Manhattan Center, known for famous alumni such as Cameron Giles, who would go on to become the face of the diplomat movement, and former bad boy artist and 1990 superstar Mace. But during this time at Manhattan Center, Karlton Hines was the man, and they would become a superpower, and Karlton would become dominant in the city, going up against future NBA players such as Kenny Anderson, who would later attend Georgia Tech and then become the 2nd overall pick in the NBA draft. And it wasn't uncommon to see coaches coming in and out of the Melrose housing projects looking for Karlton, trying to get him to sign with their school. Karlton had over 30 scholarship offers from schools around the nation, but it was one school in particular that he really wanted to go to, and that was Syracuse, and he wanted to play for Coach Jim Boeheim. And the more his team won, the more spotlight was on Karlton. Everybody wanted a piece of him, wanted to know what college he was going to, and if he wasn't going to college, was he going straight to the NBA? And it wasn't uncommon for it to always be college coaches lurking around the projects looking for Karlton. But Karlton began to have some issues in high school. He got comfortable with being a superstar, and when it came to his grades, he didn't really take them serious. And his coach, Stan Denner, he would look the other way on Karlton's grades because he needed him on the basketball court to win games. And entering his junior season of high school, there began to be a lot of changes in Karlton's life. His coach would leave for a better opportunity, and the new coaching staff butted heads with Karlton. And Karlton's mom began to feel like, with all of the media coverage and the issues he was starting to have at school with the coaches and his grades, that he needed a fresh start. and that fresh start would be in Maine at the Maine Central Institute High School under head coach Paul Pellicani and alongside future NBA All-Star and NBA champion Sam Cassell, who spoke very highly of playing alongside Karlton Hines.
I used to always call Karlton Rambo because he was so strong and the guys was guarding.
Living in the Bronx is very hard, right? So I got together with Coach Pellicani and he told me come up here as Espn.
Syracuse had the biggest gym Karlton Hines had ever seen, the Carrier Dome. This was progress. He made a verbal commitment to the Orange in June of his junior year. South Bronx was going to be in his rearview mirror. This was the final pit stop before the NBA. There was only one slight condition. He had to finish high school.
His mom's decision would prove to be right, and at the start of his junior year, Karlton Hines would get a visit at the Maine Central Institute from none other than Jim Boeheim. He spoke with Karlton for hours about his life and his future, and he told him, "You got a full ride to Syracuse University. The only thing I need you to do is graduate from Maine Central Institute and to keep your grades up. That's it." Karlton would go on to dominate his junior year, averaging 25 points a game, and everything was going good. The only issue was Karlton was always homesick. He missed the Bronx. He missed Melrose housing projects. There's a big difference in the love that he would get in Maine and the love that he would get in Harlem or the Bronx. And Karlton, he missed that love. And his mom would tell him, "You're not missing nothing here. The projects ain't going nowhere. Just stay focused on what you need to do in Maine so you can go to college." But Karlton, he just missed home too much. Whenever he would come for the weekend, he would never want to go back to Maine. His mom would always convince him to go back, but entering his senior season, he got into a big argument with his coach, Paul Pellicani, over using a phone after hours. And according to the coach, Karlton just kind of went off. And he was like, "You know what? You're going to have that type of attitude, you off the team, you can go home." And Karlton was just like, "Hey, you want me to go home? I'm leaving." And according to Karlton's mom, she felt like this is what he wanted to do. That's why it didn't take too much to push him away. But by doing this, he jeopardized his scholarship to Syracuse, and he jeopardized his future. And once Karlton was back in New York City, he would try to attend Stevenson High, who was known to have a very good basketball program, but school officials would rule Karlton ineligible once they found out that he was using a fake address. He was turned in by another coach in New York City who didn't want to see him play. And when Karlton refused to play for his team, he decided to turn that information in, and now he was ruled as ineligible. And after being ruled ineligible for basketball for his senior year, Karlton became so depressed that he dropped out of school just 4 months before graduating. And now his hoop dreams were fading and fading fast. According to his mom, he would often lay around the house feeling down, and she would tell him, "If you're not playing ball or going to school, you're gonna have to get a job. This the real world." But Karlton, he wasn't trying to hear it.
That saw him play, who had a professional life, who didn't just know that he would eventually be in the NBA.
The saddest thing I think I've been associated with in college athletics, to see and talk to a kid one day, and the next day he was literally out on the street someplace in New York.
And things would get even worse for him, because one morning he told his mom that he was going over a friend's house to get a pair of sneakers and that he would be right back. But after hours passed, his mom started to wonder where was he at. He still hadn't returned. And eventually, a neighbor by the name of Mr. Muhammad came to her door and told her that she needed to come quick and that Karlton was in big trouble. The story goes, while Karlton was hanging out in the Melrose housing projects, he ran into an associate by the name of Tweedle, and some kind of altercation broke out, and Tweedle brought out a knife and went at Karlton. And Karlton picked up a broken bottle and threw it at Tweedle, but it hit him in the throat. He fell to the ground and began to bleed out. And Karlton, from complete shock of what just happened, he took off running. Eventually, the ambulance would arrive on scene and take Tweedle away. He was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. And now, Karlton Hines, former basketball superstar and NBA prospect, was wanted for murder. He would go on a run for the next 11 days, and he wouldn't even tell his mom where he was at. And after being on a run for 11 days, Karlton's mom convinced him to turn himself in. This case would get a lot of media coverage, and Karlton would be sent to jail. But after 1 month, a judge would rule that he acted in self-defense and all charges would be dropped. It was a very confusing time in Karlton's life, but he did have a daughter to take care of, so he needed to get some money, and he went and got it the best way he knew how, on a basketball court. He would go to different boroughs throughout New York City, playing in big money tournaments sponsored by drug dealers. And he would make up to $10,000 playing in these tournaments. But that wasn't enough for Karlton. He wanted the lifestyle that the drug dealers had, the money, the cars, the jewelry, and the women. It was time for Karlton to choose a path, and he would choose the streets. His mom would do all that she could to keep him away from the streets, but there wasn't no stopping it. And one day when she found a shoebox full of money, she knew that something was up, and she confronted Karlton about it.
I remember a time when I found a shoebox in the closet, and I asked him what it was and who was it. And he said, and I was carrying the shopping bag around in the street, and it was a shoebox full of money. And I asked him, I said, who's this? He said, Mom, I'm going to tell you for the last time. He said, Mom, you have to give me that. That don't belong to you. You're just nosy. And I said, I want to know where you got it, else I'll take it to the police. He said, Mommy, listen. If you take it to the police, they're going to take that money. I owe somebody some money. You better give me that. You better give me that shopping bag. And then he told me, I said, Karlton, whatever you're doing, you better stop it. I'm serious. You're going downhill. It's showing up on you. And I said, and now you got a bag of money. He said, Mommy, just let me give the money back to the people. Don't touch that money. And I gave him the money.
But for Karlton, the decision had already been made. He was choosing the streets, and he would hit the block full force, hustling from sun up to sundown, starting off getting about $3,000 a day, moved up to $8,000, all the way to $15,000 a day. And he ended up getting so much money where he couldn't be by himself anymore. He needed a crew. And that's when he went to his old friend Tone with a proposition. He said, remember when we used to sit and talk about the old gangsters and the new dudes that was getting money too? Now we can be them dudes. I'm plugged in with the right people, and I need you to get down with me, and we can make a whole lot of money. And his homeboy Tone, he was with it. He would also recruit his friend Rick and his homeboy Carlos, and together they would flood the Bronx with heroin and coke. They would have drug addicts lined up around the block, and the police would just let it happen. The only thing they would say was keep them off the streets. And according to one of Karlton's soldiers, who used to whip up product for him, he could cook up a key in 15 minutes. But it would take him all day to cook up all the product that Karlton had, from sun up to sundown. It's said that they were making between $100,000 and $200,000 a day. And Karlton Hines and his crew was making more money than they had ever seen. Two-door Yukons, Benzes, MPV vans. He always had the newest whips, and he had the nicest jewelry. It's said that he never wore the same fur twice. And according to his high school classmate, Dame Dash, it seemed like Karlton had unlimited amounts of money. And even though Karlton had become the neighborhood superstar that he always dreamed of and was living a lavish lifestyle, able to provide for his family, had a beautiful home, he still had a void in his life, and that void was from his first love, basketball. Even though he had moved on and became a street legend, people would still ask him about his time as a high school superstar. But the way Karlton looked at it is he couldn't be taken seriously in the streets if he was a basketball player. He didn't want to seem weak, that's why he chose the life. But Karlton would get an opportunity to rekindle his love for basketball at his old stomping grounds, the Gauchos gym. One night, they were having a big basketball game, and word had got out that Karlton was coming back to play. The energy in the gym was crazy. Everybody was excited to see Karlton's return. It was like the return of the king. And after balling on the court, Karlton had to show the people that he was balling off the court as well. While he was trying to leave the gym, people surrounded him like he was an NBA superstar, and dudes in his crew had to clear the way for him so he could make it through the crowd and clear off the streets. And as Karlton sped away in his Yukon truck, about 200 people followed behind, screaming his name. He was a superstar. But when you get in love like that in the streets, there's also bound to be some jealousy, hate, and envy. Karlton and his crew began to wear bulletproof vests. They had to tool up and stay on alert at all times. Paranoia began to set in with Karlton. The stress of the street life began to weigh on him, and he started to wonder if he made the wrong decision by choosing the streets over basketball. He wanted to be there for his kids, and he knew that he couldn't be in the streets forever, and it was time to make a change. But he also wondered, was it too late? Karlton's mom would try to encourage him and tell him that he could go back to school and that it wasn't too late. But Karlton wasn't too sure that that was true. And one day, as he was reminiscing about his former life as a basketball superstar, he paid a visit to his old coach, Stan Dinner. He now owned a local sports bar, and Karlton was dropping in on him to talk about old times. And he also told him how he felt betrayed. Karlton felt that Coach Dinner leaving right before his junior season threw everything off. And if he would have stayed like he promised he would, maybe things would have worked out different. But his old coach just told him, sometimes in life, things don't always work out the way we plan, and that's just the way it is, kid. Karlton was looking for a way out of the game and out of the street life. He just didn't know how, but he would soon get his answer, because one day, Karlton went to the Meadowlands with his homeboy Rick to watch a New Jersey Nets basketball game and to also watch his former high school rival, Kenny Anderson. And as he watched Kenny play, Karlton couldn't help but to think that he should be out there too. He knew that he had the talent to be in the NBA. And on top of that, his former high school teammate Sam Cassell was selected by the Houston Rockets in the first round of the 1993 draft. But a blessing would come Karlton's way, because a scout for the United States Basketball League just so happened to be at the game and knew who Karlton was and gave him an invite to try out for the Westchester Stallions. The scout also told him that this would be great exposure to show people that Karlton Hines can still play and that he could make $1 million legally playing basketball.
Tried to tell him he could make $1 million legally playing basketball and take care of his family. That was my angle to get to him.
Did he look like he bought in?
Yeah, it looked like he wanted it. He was working out. I've seen him play.
And with this new opportunity and new motivation, Karlton fell in love with basketball again. He went back to his old stomping grounds, the Gauchos gym, and began to train under Dave McCullough, getting in shape for his upcoming tryout. He was ready to leave the streets and the drug game alone and completely focus on basketball. He looked up to Lloyd Daniels, a New York City basketball legend, who was a star in high school but had some trials and tribulations throughout his basketball career. But he still managed to make it to the NBA, and Karlton felt like this could be him, that he could still make it too.
No way you can sugarcoat the comeback story of Lloyd Daniels. A playground legend in New York, Lloyd Daniels was a drug addict. He was arrested at a crack house in Las Vegas, and a couple years later in 1989, back home in New York, he almost died in a drug-related shooting. That 1992 finds Lloyd Daniels in the NBA is nothing short of remarkable.
He wanted to get out the street. He was just hoping he could get that break like me.
His tryout date was set for April 12th, around the same time as his birthday, except this year, his birthday was going to be extra special because he was throwing a joint birthday party with his right-hand man Tone and another well-known Bronx figure by the name of B.O. And on Friday, April 8th, 1994, Karlton woke up feeling good. He finally had some positive things on the horizon, and it was time to celebrate. Not just celebrating Karlton's birthday, but also celebrating him getting out of the game for his two little daughters, and also having an opportunity to still pursue his dreams of making it to the NBA. He would link up with his crew early in the day, Carlos, Rick, and Tone, and they would prepare for the party together, getting their haircut, getting their fits together, all excited. And Karlton was getting one of his whips customized and getting some brand new seats put in it. He was ready to stunt for the night at the party and put on a show like he always did. The owner called him and told him his car was ready to be picked up, and him and his boys, they headed over. And once they arrived, the car still wasn't ready, so they kind of just sat around waiting. And the owner ended up coming to talk to Karlton and said, "You getting this car customized, you got rims, you got all this stuff and no alarm system." So he talked to Karlton about that for a second. Then Karlton came back and spoke with his boy Los about what else he might have done to his car. But while they were talking, a gunman appeared from the shadows and let off multiple shots, hitting both of them. Carlos let off a scream, and their two friends that came running, they found Carlos just wounded. They found Karlton barely hanging on for life. They tried to get him in the car, but they seen he was fading away. And as they was trying to drive off, they looked in his eyes and seen he was gone. Karlton Hines was dead. His death would send shockwaves through the Bronx, and it would devastate his mom.
And then Keith came up to me and said, "Let's go upstairs." And when I get upstairs, he says, "Mommy called me dead." And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I couldn't even break down, because I just seen him. I had to be to work at 3:15, and I'm leaving out for work, and he dies exactly 3 o'clock. I couldn't believe it. And so, I wouldn't make myself believe. And I tried staying up like he was going to knock at the door and come right on it like it was a joke, like it was a real joke. I could not believe.
The murder of Karlton Hines had the streets buzzing. He was a legend in 2 games, on the basketball court and in the drug game, and people wanted to know who was behind his demise. Not only that, the person that he was with, Carlos, who was wounded, a few months later, he was murdered too. And his good friend who he was having his joint birthday party with, B.O., he was also murdered. And they were all murdered by the same person, a man by the name of Peter Rolock, aka Pistol Pete, the founder of the Sex Money Murder Bloods out of New York City, said to be one of the original sets under the UBN, the United Blood Nation. They terrorized the Bronx throughout the 90s, selling drugs and dropping bodies. But Pistol Pete's bloody reign over the Bronx wouldn't last forever, and in the late 90s, he would be found guilty on multiple charges, including murder. He would be sent to ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado. At the trial, they were trying to give him the death penalty, but he copped a plea and took life in solitary confinement instead. In court, Pistol Pete apologized to the victims of his crimes, including the mother of Karlton Hines, but that still doesn't take the pain away from her losing her youngest son.
Because I can accept any death dealing with illness, because that's the way I feel, that's the way the Lord wants us to go. But I can't accept a murder.
Karlton Hines is a cautionary tale of how once the streets get a hold of you, it's hard to get away, and it could crush dreams and ruin lives. There was media coverage at his funeral because he was a basketball star in high school, and they talked to his 2 little girls. One was 2 and one was 5. The youngest was quoted as saying, "My daddy's in heaven now," and the 5-year-old responded with, "But heaven doesn't come down, and I'll never see my daddy again." It's sad. And Karlton Hines, he was only 23 years old when he died. Rest in peace, man.